Okay, hello class. This is an experimental software that I'm using. It's called OBS Studio. If you see any problems with this video, please let me know via email. That'd be the best. Okay, so we're going to do our data analysis in Google Sheets. You can do it in either Google Sheets or Excel. You can do it in any spreadsheet if you find a third one even. But I prefer Google Sheets mainly because it's collaborative, which means many people can work on it at the same time, and it saves all your data. Stupid Excel doesn't save. You have to manually press Control S or click Save. And the last reason is on Google Sheets, you can access it from any platform at all, even your cell phone. On Microsoft Excel, you have to have the license and blah, blah, blah. It's horrible. I don't like Microsoft. I have a vendetta. So what we're doing is we're opening Google Sheets. We're hitting blank to start a new Google Sheet. We have an untitled spreadsheet here. We want to title it your name, first and last name, dash activity 3.4, which is called stats with spreadsheets. Stats with spreadsheets. Now this is the title for our file. In case it gets lost or anything, look, it says it's saved in my drive. You can organize this drive. You can open your drive in another folder, but it should automatically save to your drive, just the default folder. So that way, whenever you go home, you can look at it there and edit it there, and you know what to look for because of the title here. But we also want to put our header in here. This is good practice to put a header, your name, your title, and date. And then actually put your name, not Mr. Halsey, your name, and then the same title that we put up there. Like I said, this is just good practice to put a header in your data. Sorry, I'm talking and typing. To put a header in your data so that you can read the data and know what we're talking about, as well as find it in the title. So it's a little redundant, but that's okay. Engineers like redundancy. It's good to have redundancy in your products. That way you have multiple sources of your information. So we've got this header. I want to make this look a little better. I can highlight with click and drag. Highlight all three of those cells. I can do Control B on my keyboard for bold, or I can click bold up here in the ribbon. That looks better. I also want to horizontally align. I want to horizontally align those to the right so that it looks right next to it. And maybe this date, it automatically goes to the left. I'm sorry, to the right. I can align it to the left. So we're good with our header there. Like I said earlier, click and drag for highlighting everything, or multiple cells. So I want to go over a little bit about the terminology here. This is a cell. This is a cell. This is a cell. This cell has a name. This is B2. B is the column, 2 is the row. It's organized very nicely. The columns are letters, the rows are numbers, and every cell actually has a name. And there are two modes of looking at the cells. This is just selecting the cell, but when I click again or double click, now I'm editing the contents of the cell, and that's going to be really important whenever we do numbers. So I want to say feet and inches. Really, I would call this distance, but since distance is the only thing we're dealing with here, I can just say feet and inches. I wanted to make that bold. These are headers for our data. So I'm just going to put in my data here. I'm sorry. There we go. I'm going to put in my data here. I'm making up my data, but you should have the actual data from your Fling machine, and it should be in units of feet inches. Okay, this is one unit entirely, feet inches, like your height. I'm 5'6", so maybe I actually flung my cotton ball 5'6" Okay, maybe I have some. I told you to measure it to the nearest quarter inch, so I should have some that are a ½ inch, some that are quarter, some that are 0.0. and some that are, maybe bigger, 11.25. And you might have noticed an interesting thing here. I tried to put tier 2.0, but it got rid of my 2. I'm sorry, it got rid of my 0 and just left a 2. That's because my format is on whatever I have it set to by default. So what I want to do is I want to increase the decimal places right here. This is a matter of formatting. I want to increase my decimal places for all of these to 2. 2 decimal places for your inches, please. That way it'll say 6.00, 2.25, 2.50, etc. So how many do I have? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. I asked you to get 10 data points. If you have a little less than 10, that's okay. Maybe it landed right on the crack of the tile, so I could say 0.00. Maybe this was 0.25. And again, I might have to reformat. So I would just wait until you type in your 10 data points and then reformat. Or then format once. So I have feet and inches. Now I want to do decimal feet. Decimal feet. So I'm converting my feet inches, my unit of feet inches, to decimal feet. And what's the conversion factor there? Well, if I was to write this out on paper, maybe I'll do that in the future. I want to convert it to feet. Well, 5 feet is already 5 feet. So I don't have to convert that part. This is just, by the way, this is just me note taking off to the side. You don't have to copy this. 5 feet is already 5 feet. But my 6 inches, I need to convert that. I need to convert that into feet. So if I did 6 inches divided by 1, let's see, that's not gonna work. Maybe if I just do the whole thing left align. Like I said, this is just kind of a scratch pad for me. 6 inches divided by 1 times, I need inches on bottom. So remember, 12 inches to 1 foot. And then I multiply these two fractions straight across. This is 6 divided by 12 is 0.5, and the unit I'm left with is feet. Okay, so I have half of a foot there. But this is showing you my formula. I take my, this is half a foot, and then I need to add that back to my 5 feet earlier. So what I'll end up with is 5.5 feet. And now you can kind of get a formula going. You take the feet, the actual feet, add that to the number of inches divided by 12, which is this. So take your feet, add that to the number of inches divided by 12. And we could do it in our heads, but watch. Spreadsheet is a big calculator. So to enter the calculator mode, bam, you hit equals, and now we're in a calculator. Guess what? In college, I used a spreadsheet for my calculator instead of a TI-84 or anything like that. Because of all those reasons I mentioned, Google Sheets is awesome before, but also because we have good documentation of all of our calculations here. So I said equals, and like I said, feet. Watch, if I hit 5 plus 6 divided by 12, that'll do the trick. But unfortunately, then I'll have to do that for every single one. There's an even better trick. If I hit equals and then if I click this cell over here, look, it writes A6, which is the name of that cell, A6. Let me just leave that for the sake of demonstration, and you can see if I change the contents of A6 to blah, 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 it'll change that to blah, blah, blah also. What if I have A6 times 2? Look, it's double. It's double whatever A6 is. So really neat. No matter how you change it, it's going to change accordingly. So I forgot what I was in before. Let's see, 5 feet. Okay. But that's not my formula. It's that feet plus the number of inches divided by 12. And 5.5, just like we calculated. That does the trick. And it does the trick better because, like I said, if you change this, it'll change over here. Now we're at, over here. Now we're at 4.5 inches. So it keeps up with our data. It's nice. Also, instead of having to type it in every single time, there's an amazing feature right here, this knob. If I hover over this knob, I get a crosshair for my cursor. Click and drag that crosshair down. Boom. It carries your formula all the way down for all of your rows in this column. Pretty awesome. So we're on this video if you want to see how that happens again. But just to be clear, you can't do that while you're editing the contents of your cell. There's no knob right there. You have to exit the cell, then go back and highlight it. Don't double click and edit the contents of your cell. Go back, highlight it, and then, like I said, you can carry that down. Once again, I want to be in units or in two decimal places for my feet inches. I'm going to clear this off. This was just my scratch pad from earlier. Now I have feet decimal and it looks good. Now I can calculate all my data. So side note, you should not have any letters or any characters in here, non-numeric characters, because it'll mess up your formulas. Okay, so it just needs to be numbers. I think that's everything there. Now I have good data that I can work with in 1 unit. Feet inches, I don't like that because it's 2 different numbers for 1 unit. Now I have 1 unit together. You could also do inches and decimal. Maybe to challenge yourself, you can try that. Figure out what the formula is using these two, blah, 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 whatever that is. And then you can do your calculations in inches if you want to challenge yourself. But I'm going to stick with decimal feet. Now I want you to figure out the mean, median, mode. Yeah, let's go ahead and do range, and let's do minimum and maximum. The way we can do that, I'll try to talk while I'm formatting like earlier. The way we can do that is, like I said, Google Sheets is a big calculator, but not only does it do calculations on numbers, it also has what we call formulas. The formulas all have names. So let me finish this up and then do that. Formulas all have names. Hit equal to go into your calculator mode. And now the name of this formula, instead of mean, it's actually called average. And you see it kind of guessing. You see Google suggesting different completions of this word here. Excuse me, I just want to do the average. Now it gives you a good hint. I would stop and read this summary, read all this information. It tells you what the formula actually does. But right here, it's asking for inside the parentheses, it's asking for your data. Watch, instead of typing in instead of manually typing in the names of these cells, I can click and drag. Beautiful. Now that colon means through, C6 through C15, and I don't have to close the parentheses every time. It'll do it if I just hit enter. Boom, 5.66 or 5.77. That is my average of this data set. Good, and you guys can do the median, try to find the formula there, mode, range, minimum, and maximum. Not all of them are just called average. I'll give you a hint. Watch, minimum is just MIN. But again, you need to make sure to grab all your data here before you do that. Okay, I'll go ahead and do the maximum as well. It's just max. Copy all that. So see if you can pause this video, see if you can find the median, mode, and range as well. Okay, maybe you tried to find all of that. I'm not going to go find you median and mode, but I will tell you there's no formula for range. So that was kind of a trick question. There's no formula for range. Not that I can find. If you find one, please let me know. But it's pretty easy. You know the range. Go ahead and pause the video and try to do it. The range is maximum minus minimum. And you can grab your data from your cells. It'll tell you. Bam. Okay, so we've got a bunch of data collected. Like I said, you find median and mode. Pretty simple. Now, we want to create a histogram. That's the last thing we're going to do, but it's going to take a while because first we have to create a frequency table, and I'll show you what that means in a second. So the first step, this is mainly why I'm doing the video because I had to explain this so many times today when I lectured for B-Days. But you need to highlight all of this data, feet decimal, including the header of this data. Don't forget this, feet decimal and all your data. Go up to data up here in your toolbar. Go down to pivot table. When you click pivot table, it actually pops up to a new sheet. These are kind of like tabs in a spreadsheet, but they're called sheets. That way you can keep all of your data in one big spreadsheet file, but multiple sheets. So we're in this pivot table sheet, but nothing came up, so we have to add data to it. Feet decimal in rows, add to rows, and add feet decimal to values, rows and values. Now we got a couple of nice things here. Next thing is change the sum to count. Summarize by count. And now on mine, hopefully on y'all's too, there should be only one of each of these. Maybe if I go and change it, just for the sake of demonstration, I'll change this one to be the same as this one up here, so 4 feet and 2.25 inches. And now I have 4.19, 4.19. Let's see what happens to my pivot table. Just as I suspected, it has a count of 2 for the 4.19. I'm going to go back and change that. Let's see what happens when I hit Control Z. Yep, it changed it just perfectly. And now I have both of these two. So I should have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 data points. And a count of 1 for each. If you don't, that's fine. If you have a couple of duplicates, that's okay. Excuse me. So now I want to actually copy this whole pivot table, highlight and copy the whole pivot table, and paste it back in our original sheet. If you did not grab the whole thing, you will not be able to see this pivot table editor. Whenever you click on the pivot table, you'll be able to see part of it. I'm sorry, you'll be able to see some of your information, but maybe not the whole pivot table editor. Let's try it over here. Oh, it did it actually. Okay, so it should do it. I'm not sure what the problem is with some students, but sometimes this doesn't pop up. Make sure you get the pivot table editor, otherwise you won't have the full pivot table. The next thing I want to do is I want to change these labels. This can be distance in feet. And this, I want it to be called frequency. And the reason for that is that's just going to look a little bit better on our histogram in a second. So now that we have this pivot table looking real nice, we want to group our data together, because if we create a histogram, and you know, I'll just go ahead and show you how that's done now for the sake of demonstration. So I highlight all the data, including the headers again, and I can hit Insert Chart. Boom. Oh, I'm sorry, I messed up. Let's delete that. You should not have the header tables this time. I was thinking maybe that was a mistake, but I was doubting myself. Yes, you have to click off and then select it just like before you can delete it. So highlight the data, not the header tiles this time, because that's not included in the data. Then Insert Chart, and it's still doing the weird thing. So just forget about that. Actually, if you highlight this data, I think it should work this time. I think the problem here is that it's trying to guess my chart type, and it's guessing wrong. But basically the idea is you have only one instance of each of these data points. So if I plotted it as a histogram, it would just be 1 unit high for each of these numbers. We don't want that. We want to group them together. And I actually want to group them into 5 groups, 5 bins. So I have to create a pivot group rule. So it's going to ask you, what's the minimum value in your group? What's the maximum value in your group? And what's the interval size? So we want to have 5 intervals. So we need to do some calculations. I X'd out of that, or you can cancel it. I need to do one more calculation. I'm going to call it interval size. And I want to format this the same way. Let's do this over here. Okay. Now before I can do that, I really want to round these values up here. I want to make sure my minimum value is included in my graph, in my histogram, so I need to round that down and round the max up. No matter what this number is, you need to round the minimum down and the maximum up, because these are the bounds of our chart. They need to include these no matter what. So like if I said this is 4.7 and you round it up to 5, that means that 4.7 is going to get cut off. You don't want that. You always run around the minimum down and the maximum up for this activity, or for this task that we're doing here. We're creating our bounds. In the range, you always want to round that and that'll be clear in a second. You always want to round that up. We're going to create the interval size by taking our rounded range. Again, I hit equals to go into the calculator mode. Our rounded range divided by 5 groups. And in this case, it just so happened to be 1. If my range was 7, like it has been in past demonstrations, then my interval size would be 1.4. Okay, but that's artificial. My interval size happened to be 1. So now that I've got these 3 values, minimum, maximum, and interval size, I can create my pivot group rule really well. Minimum is 1, maximum is 9, interval size is 1. Coincidentally, it doesn't always have to be 1. So now it gave me 5 groups, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and it gave me the frequency of data in those groups. So now if I highlight these 2 columns and then hit insert and chart, now it gives me a beautiful histogram. This is actually just a column chart like it says over here, but since we have created frequency as this axis, we can go ahead and call it a histogram. There's actually a histogram option over here in your chart types, but it's not really going to work the way that I've set it up. So we created a column chart, aka a bar chart, and in this case this type of bar chart is a histogram. So I got frequency and distance labeled properly like I wanted, even though I didn't highlight them. They're labeled up here. Google Sheets just guessed on that. I can give this a good name. It doesn't have to. Your name doesn't have to be the same as mine, but I'm gonna say histogram of fling machine distance data. And whenever you click on any of these items, it automatically inserts you into the the chart editor option over here on the right. But you could scroll around and look at some of these options, make it kind of fun. Maximize, whoa, I don't like that. So you can mess around with this if you want. I really want you to make sure you have a good title, good axis labels. I like my grid lines. I like to make sure my grid lines are whole numbers. Sometimes the major grid lines will end up being, will end up having these halves in there. I don't like that. I want to change mine to, what would that be, 4? Yeah, 0, 1, 2, and 3. So I want to make sure you have whole numbers here. And I also like to have, on these here, I like to slant them a little bit, because without slanting them, that's just a lot of information. And let's see, what other thing do I like? I like data labels. Even though it's pretty easy to read this histogram, I still like data labels. And over here, I actually don't like this legend. You don't need it. Frequency, obviously, it's frequency. You don't need that. If you had more than one data set shown on one graph, that'd be helpful, but I'm going to take that off by hitting position none. So I think that looks good. For now, that looks good. You can resize it if you want. I want to squish mine in a little bit. Yeah, to make it line up with my title there. Okay, now I want to scroll down and put this thing, click and drag this thing to go underneath my information here. Now, the way you're going to, this is all done. Oh, I'm sorry. There's one more thing, and I probably will remind you in class. Don't forget the standard deviation. I noticed that earlier and had to remind myself to put it in. Don't forget the standard deviation as well. So I'll give you a second to try to figure that out. Okay, if you look, there are multiple standard deviation formulas. These two are the big ones. STDEV, standard deviation, and STDIVP, standard deviation of the entire population. So you need to tell me, are we doing the population standard deviation or the sample standard deviation? It doesn't say sample, but that's what the default is, sample. Population or sample? Think about that. Okay, the whole thing, these 10 data points, is only a sample. It's only a sample of all the data that we can get from our fling machine. It's a sample of the performance of the fling machine as a whole. Okay, there's a better way of doing that also. Maybe if I wanted to, I could edit the contents of the whole column to be formatted the way I want it to, and I can do that way before I edit any extra data, but that's a side note. Like I said, the standard deviation needs to be STDEV, not STDEVP, because this is just a sample of all the possible flings out of your filling machine. Okay, now I've got a bunch of good stuff. To submit it, I want to make this a little smaller, maybe that small. It looks real small here, but that's okay. Maybe I'll make it a little bigger, 60%. Yeah, that's fine. Now I want to open up my snipping tool. My other desktop, sorry about that. Snipping tool. And the way I accessed that was by clicking this button here, and then I start typing. Or you can hit the Windows key, that's the shortcut. So I want to snip this, picture of this. Maybe I'll make it a little smaller. And the reason I put this histogram down below is because in a second when I paste it into my print doc, it's going to be bigger on the sides. This is the width of my paper. It's going to be bigger and prettier. If I put it over here on the right, then it's going to shrink it a lot more. So even though it looks pretty shrunken right now, it's going to look better. Okay, so I go to Schoology to turn it in, log in. My Schoology is going to look different from yours. But it's the same idea, same stuff going on. Unit 3, assignments, this one, activity 3.4, and this print doc is how I turn it in. Turning in, paste the screenshot of your worksheet to the print doc below. It's a Google Doc. You have access to edit it. These are from 8th period. So I think I'll clear this out before class starts tomorrow. You'll just go in here, you'll take what you snipped, you'll copy it, Control C is the hotkey there, and then you'll paste it in, Control V is the hotkey. Now look how big and pretty that looks. Okay, and that's everything. I think we're good. Let me know if you have any questions.